Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our Bible study going through the book of Romans. If you have a Bible, and I hope you do, please go ahead and open it up to Romans chapter 13. We are in the 13th chapter of Romans today. I'll give you some time to turn to that, and while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and give a welcome to all of you. If you are familiar with the series and have watched it up till now, welcome back. I hope you guys are as excited as I am to dive into the scripture. And if you are brand new to the series, if you've never been here before and this is all new to you, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope you'll get something good from this video. But if you're curious and want to learn more and want to hear more about the book of Romans, check out the playlist that I've made for all this. You'll see it at the very end of the video. I've got a whole playlist where I've broken down the introduction to the book of Romans all the way from chapter 1 up till now. It's been an absolute blast, guys. I know that I've had fun with it, and I hope you guys who have been watching this for a while have too. If you're brand new, I hope you get something good out of it. Definitely check it out. It's a lot of fun. And guys, I'll be real, we're almost done. We've only got 3 more chapters after this one. We got chapter 14, 15, and 16. So we're so close to done with Romans, and I'm a little sad about that, but you know what? It's been an awesome ride. I can't tell you guys how much fun this has been, and I hope we get to do more Bible studies like this in the future. But that's not today. Today we're taking a look at chapter 13. Now, chapter 13 is shorter than the last few chapters we've looked at so far. It is shorter, but it's no less important. Chapter 13 is a continuation of what Paul is doing at this point. In the last few chapters of Romans, Paul is speaking to the Church of Rome and giving them an idea of what the Christian life looks like. Okay? Because what he's done at the beginning is he's basically broken down theological points. Now he is talking about practical points, things that Christians need to keep in mind going forward. How do you live as a Christian? What does behaving as a Christian look like? That's what he's answering here. And chapter 13 verse 1 is a heavy one. Okay, we're starting out both feet in. This is going to be a heavy verse to start with. So brace yourself, guys. Let's get started. Chapter 13 verse 1. Y'all ready? Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Now, this verse, when understood in context, makes sense. Remember, Paul is writing to the Church of Rome. And at this point in time, there were many Roman Christians who thought that they needed to rebel against the pagan Roman government. But Paul is saying, do not do that. In fact, there was a tax revolt about this time that kicked off, and Paul was probably calling them out saying, don't get involved in that. Don't participate in that. We need to respect the authorities that exist, for they exist because God allows these authorities to exist. Now, keep in mind, Paul is not advocating here to follow government over God. That's not what he's saying, but he is saying that governmental power exists because God appointed it to exist. God allowed it to exist. And to stand against the Roman government is to go against God's wishes. He's saying, submit yourself to their authority. It's fine. In fact, Jesus dealt with this too. And we will talk more about that as we go further into the chapter. But now y'all are probably wondering, okay, but what about us? What about us? Does this adhere to us today? Yes, it does. Let's break this down. So first, let's talk about the way that most Christians look at chapter 13, verse 1. Christians understand Romans 13, verse 1 in different ways. Now, all Christians agree, for the most part, I would say for the most part, that we are to live at peace with the state as long as the state allows us to live by our religious conviction. So as long as the state lets us be Christians and allows us to live as Christians, we're cool. We'll live at peace with that, right? For hundreds of years, however, there have been at least 3 interpretations of how we are to do this. There are 3 ways that Christians tend to look at this. The first is that some Christians believe that the state is so corrupted, so human, so of the world, that Christians should have as little to do with the government as possible. Although they should be good citizens as long as they can do so without compromising their beliefs, they should not work for the government, they should not work with the government, they should not vote in elections or serve in the military, they should do nothing for the government. There are Christians out there who are so anti-church with state that they will not even participate in elections because they believe that the government is just too corrupt for it. The second way that some Christians look at it is they believe that God has given the state authority to certain areas and the church authority in others. Christians can be loyal to both and can work with either. They should not, however, confuse the two. And in this view, church and state are concerned with 2 totally different spheres, the spiritual and the physical, and this complement each other but do not work together. I actually side more with this one. I believe that the church and the government are two separate entities, and Jesus even says as much. And again, we'll get to that. And then the third way that Christians look at it is they believe that Christians have a responsibility to make the state better. And they can do this politically by electing Christian or other high principle leaders. And they can also do this morally by serving as an influence for good society, by voting for the right people, or by running for election themselves. And in this view, church and state ideally work together for the good of all. But note, none of these views advocate rebelling against or refusing to obey the government's laws or regulations, unless those laws clearly require you to violate the moral standards revealed by God. Wherever we find ourselves, we must be responsible citizens as well as responsible Christians. Now, you'll note the part that I said there was important. We are not to rebel against the state or against the government unless that government is violating our ability to behave as proper Christians. Now, I would argue the only time we should ever stand up to the government or resist the government is when what they're doing is ordering us or encouraging us to disobey what we know to be right in God's eyes. Simply, you must live as Christ asked you to live. Be concerned with your own spiritual welfare. As we read on, let's keep reading into verse 3. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. Now, what does Paul mean when he says all this? In a just government, punishments exist to right wrongs. He's actually trying to be positive here. He's trying to give a positive outlook on governments. When a government is run properly, when a government is run well, then the government's job is to make sure that moral laws are abided by. Those who do wrong are punished for it. Those who do evil are punished, and the people are protected. As he says, it does not wield the sword in vain. It does not wield the sword for no reason. The government has a sword for a reason, to protect you and to make sure that laws are abided by. The government has a function. Obviously, the government can be corrupted. And in those situations, that's when you have to see, is it a religious issue? Is the government pushing you away from your faith? Or is your government pushing you in a political direction that you don't agree with? That's the real question. But Paul is not for a religious, zealous upheaval of a government. That's what he's trying to avoid here. Now let's move on to verse 6. This is a good one. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Now, it's kind of funny that I'm reading this as we get close to tax time in the year. I think that is kind of ironic. I didn't plan that, I promise. But I do think that's important. Jesus actually was asked about this. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus was approached by a Pharisee who asked him, Jesus, who do we pay? Do we pay taxes to Rome, or do we tithe at the church? See, this was the ultimate question. It was a trap for Jesus, because if Jesus says that we tithe at the church instead of pay taxes, we shouldn't pay taxes, then he would become an enemy of Rome, because he's outright saying we shouldn't pay taxes to Rome. That would make him an enemy of the state. But if he says we should pay taxes to Rome and not tithe, then the Jews will hate him and the church will hate him, because he's actually saying that we should give to Rome, and they don't like Rome. So either way, Jesus loses. Jesus' response was this: show me a coin. Whose face is on it? And when they said Caesar's, he said, then render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give unto God that which is God's. What he's saying is, there are earthly things and there are heavenly things. The government is earthly. Give to the government what is earthly. But your soul, your spirit, belongs to God. And that's what matters. If the government asks for coin, fine, give them coin. You owe them coin. That's something you owe the government. But they cannot have your soul, your spirit, and that's what tithing is. Tithing can often be money, but more than that, tithing is giving of yourself to the church, giving of yourself to God, giving of yourself to the community. That's the difference. Paul is saying, oh, give what you owe to those you owe it. See, again, this goes back to this idea that if your whole stance is, we shouldn't pay taxes, God never intended us to pay taxes, these people, the Jews already did this with Rome, okay? And Paul is saying, that's not what we fight for. Your job is not to rise up and build a theocracy. That's what Paul is warning against. He doesn't want the Jews to go out and build a theocracy. He doesn't want this new Christian church to build a theocracy in Rome. That wasn't his goal. He's saying, no, God will work these things out for himself, okay? That's God's domain. You behave as a Christian. You don't worry about that. You don't worry about the government. The government is there for a reason. Let God deal with that. You focus on you and your faith with God. If you owe taxes, pay your taxes. If there are laws in place that are meant to protect you, abide by them. Don't be anti-government just for the sake of being anti-government and then mask it with, but God told me to. And believe it or not, there are people who will do that. And it doesn't make them look good. It doesn't make God look good. Now again, I'm going to stress this. Do I think that the government can be corrupted? Heck yes, absolutely. But again, don't revolt for the sake of revolting. There are ways to stand up for your faith without being anti-government, anti-authoritarian, all this kind of stuff. And we could probably have a whole series where we just talk about the right way to treat the government biblically, right? But we'll worry about that another time. We got more to go because Paul's got more to say in this chapter. So let's keep moving. We're in verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. You know, Paul makes a big deal about love. In fact, in Galatians, he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and the very first fruit of the Spirit is love. You show love to others. When Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment? What is the most important law? He says, the most important commandment is to love the Lord with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second most important is to love your neighbor as yourself. If you do these two things, you will have salvation. Paul is repeating that here. And it actually makes perfect sense. He lays out a couple of the 10 commandments here in verse 9. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. If you love your neighbor as yourself, those commandments fall right in line with that. You love others. You love other people. And he ends it in verse 10. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. You want to know how to fulfill the law of God? You want to know how to fulfill God's laws? Love other people. Love other people. Now, I want to stress this too while we're on that subject. Is love the same as complacency? Is love the same as acceptance? No, love isn't that. There's been this movement lately from people who try to use Jesus' teachings to encourage things that are unbiblical. And I'm going to say this right now. Love does not always mean that you let people get away with evil things. The idea, if you love me, you'll let me do this. If you love me, you'll do this for me. If you love me, you'll accept me for what I am. That's not love. That's not love. To love your neighbor means that you care about them. To love your neighbor means that you care about their welfare, their well-being, their health, their safety. You don't hurt them. You don't steal from them. You don't covet them. You don't commit adultery through them. You show love to them. That is how you fulfill the commandment. Love fulfills the law. All right. Let's keep going. Verse 11. We're powering through this. And do this. Understand the present time. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Interesting phrasing here. What's he talking about? What does he mean by the hour has already come? The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. What's he talking about? There are two ways you can interpret that. There are a couple ways you can interpret that, and let's break down those few ways. What he's essentially saying here is that the night, when he says the night is nearly over, the day has almost come, the night refers to the present evil time, and the day refers to the time of Christ's return. Now, some people are surprised that Paul lists dissension and jealousy with the gross and obvious signs of orgies and drunkenness and sexual immorality, because what he says in verse 13, let us behave decently as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy, rather clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. What he's essentially saying is this: we are living in dark times, and I think we can all agree with that. We've been living in dark times for as long as there has been time. We live in dark days. But Paul is saying, don't live like you're in dark days. Live every day like it's the brightest of days. Live every day as God would have you live. See, what I've heard some Christians do, and believe me, I've heard this in a church before, and it shocked me. I never went back to that church again, but I heard a deacon at this church say, you just got to kind of go with the flow. People act this way, and the best way to reach them is to, just do as they do. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. As Christians, we cannot be of the world. As Christians, we need to live every day as if we're already living with Jesus, as if he's already come back and is living amongst us. Don't engage in sexual immorality. Don't engage in drunkenness. Don't engage in carelessness, which is basically like rude or crude and socially unacceptable behavior. You live every day in a manner that makes people look at you and say, they're different. They're different. Verse 14 is very clear. Rather, clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. In verse 12, the night is nearly over, the day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Clothe yourselves in what is good and righteous and upright. You could sum up this whole chapter with that bit right there. We live in governments that don't always please us. We live around neighbors who we don't always like. But the answer to that is this: to live as if Jesus is with us, to live as if God was walking beside us. Yes, we live in dark times. Yes, we live in difficult situations. Yes, we're not always happy with the way the government run things, or the way our neighbors behave, or the way our friends behave, or the way our enemies treat us. Absolutely. And I get it. It's hard. It can be very hard. It can be absolutely defeating. But we as Christians are called to something better, to something higher than boorishness. And the Christian who says, you know what, there's no point. Live as they do, it's fine. The minute you do that, you're submitting to the world. You're submitting to the world. We have to avoid that. Believe it or not, we are in spiritual warfare. And Paul talks about this in Ephesians, in the book of Ephesians. We are in the middle of a spiritual battle. Internally and externally. Our flesh, we talked about this in Romans 7 and Romans 8. Our flesh craves sin. We want it. We want sin. And there's no question that inevitably we will fall to sin. We will stumble and fall. But Christ is always there calling us away from it, encouraging us, strengthening us, enriching us. I think a good analogy that I actually heard Frank Turek say this. I think it's a beautiful analogy, so I want to use it here. Think about it like this. You go outside to do anything, and odds are pretty good you're going to get dirty. You're going to get dirty. You're going to get smelly. You're going to stink. It's funny. I will clean myself perfectly well. I'll go outside for just 20 minutes, and I come back in, and my fingernails are dirty. I've got stuff all over my face. I just stink. I don't even remember doing all that much, but I did it. I'm going to stink. So what do? I get a shower. Now, because I got a shower, does that mean I'm never going to stink again? Does that mean I'm never going to get dirty again? No, it's going to happen. It's bound to happen. But that's why I have the shower at all times, to go back to remind myself that there is cleanliness. Now, here's the funny thing. If you walk around having showered, there are people out there who may not own a shower or may not like showering or who think they're too good to shower, and they're going to see you walking around clean, and they're going to say one of two things. Either one, they're going to say, wow, that's interesting. He seems so clean. I wonder how he gets so clean. But then you're also going to hear people say, he thinks he's better than us because he's so clean. He thinks he's so good. He thinks he's so cool because he dresses nice. He cleans himself up. He smells good. Oh yeah, he must think he's better than us. And that is what it means to walk as a Christian. We have a shower. That shower is Jesus' love. That shower is Jesus' salvation. We get dirty walking about in this world of sin and filth and yuckiness, right? But we have a shower that has cleaned us. Now, yes, when we walk out into the world, we are exposed to that sin. We're exposed to that debauchery, and inevitably, we will get some dirt on us. But we have the shower to always go back to, and people will see that, and they will see that there is something different about you. They will see that there's something unique about you because you value being clean. You like being clean. And there are people out there who don't care. There are people out there who are so used to the filth and so used to the grime and so used to living in their own ways, they don't really care anymore. So when they see you walking around clean, either A, they're going to admire it and want to find out how you got so clean, or B, they're going to resent you for it. They're going to think you're better than them and they're going to hate you. And that is the way people look at the Christian life. But how do you get clean? How do you get that shower? How do you get cleaned up? Paul is laying it out for us in Romans. Jesus' salvation is the key. It's not the law. You can't follow it right. It's not the government you're under. And it's not fulfilling your own selfish wants. It is Jesus Christ's love. And you demonstrate for other people that salvation by behaving as Paul laid out here. Love your neighbors. Submit to authorities. Follow God's direction. And behave as if Jesus was with you already. That's the message of Romans 13. And that's it. That was all of Romans 13. Pretty quick, right? So that's going to wrap up for today. Next time we'll go into Romans 14. That next chapter is going to be a doozy, and you're going to recognize it because I've quoted it a few times in other videos. Romans 14 will be fun. But that's for next time, guys. Thank you so much. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.